Okay, students, so we will now talk about the transport across membrane. We have already talked of the different functions and structure of the membrane. Now we'll talk of the different type of transports that can occur across membrane. Now, first of all, we need to understand why crossing the membrane is important. I mean, why is it important that membranes should allow the movement of molecules from inside to outside cell and outside to inside cell? So, the steady traffic of small molecules and ions across the plasma membrane is seen to occur in both directions. Now you see very small molecules, they can easily cross the lipid bilayer, right? And membranes are selectively permeable. So all this traffic is under some control and especially the large molecules. But if we talk of large molecules that are very specific, say important hormones or any other biomolecules, the membranes, since they define the identity of different type of cells in a living system, right? It is, it is seen that these membranes are very selective in what components they are going to allow to transport and what component they will restrain in order to move inside the cell. So, this passage is controlled in part due to the hydrophobic core of the membrane. Now you have seen that the interior of the membrane, since the hydrocarbon tails of both the phospholipid bilayers, they extend into the cell interior, the core of the membrane is highly hydrophobic, right? So, definitely small hydrophobic molecules, right, they can easily cross the lipid bilayer, whereas the polar molecules and ions face a lot of difficulty. That is why the membrane proteins are present there, and these proteins assist and control the transport of ions and polar molecules across the membrane, because of course that hydrophobic interior does not allow the non-polar molecules to cross through it. Now, we'll talk about these special proteins, which are called the transport proteins, that help the membrane, successfully perform different type of transports across it. And it is very important to learn about the different type of transport proteins that are present in the membrane. So ions and polar molecules, they can cross the lipid bilayer by passing through the transport proteins only that span the membrane. Now this word span means, I have already talked of these transporters are actually transmembrane proteins that cross both the leaflets of the lipid bilayer so that they are able to connect the extracellular side to the intracellular side and can allow the movement of molecules from cell interior to the cell exterior, or from the cell exterior to the cell interior, vice versa. Now, some transport proteins have a hydrophilic channel also, depending upon what is the composition of amino acids which is present inside the tunnel that is formed by those transporters. Whereas others bind molecules and carry passengers across the membrane physically. So here I just mean to say that you'll see two types of transporters. Now, one that just form a passage, right, just like a corridor, that can allow the movement of molecules, that creates a path to move molecules or ions from cell interior, that is from the cytosol to the extracellular side, or from the extracellular side to the cell interior. Whereas you'll see there are other proteins, right, that will act like a vehicle. That is, suppose they are present in the outer leaflet of the lipid bilayer, they will bind to a molecule, carry that molecule, move to the inner leaflet and transport it there, right? So these are called, carrier proteins that actually carry the molecules, whereas others are called channel proteins. We'll talk about this in this lecture ahead. And each transport protein is specific. I mean, for each and every type of molecule or ion, that has to cross the membrane, right? These transporters are specific. It is not like that a single transporter, say, can transport glucose or any other biomolecule across the membrane. I mean, these are very specific, right? I mean, they are specific in what molecules, even if it is a channel protein, what ion it is going to allow to flow through the membrane, and if it is a carrier, what molecule it is going to carry with it. Okay, so are you clear with this? These type of transport proteins. Did you get the term? Okay, let's move ahead. Now, before talking of the specific type of transport proteins, we'll now take a look at this diagram and see what are the basic types of transport that can occur across membrane. Membrane transport is broadly classified into two types. One is called passive and the other is called active transport. Can anybody or any of you tell me by taking a look at this diagram that what is the major difference that you see between passive and active transport? Just take a look at this figure and tell me what is the major difference you see between passive and active transport. Okay, Palak says active transport requires something to transport molecules. Shraddha says energy consumption is required in active transport. And Niharika says passive transport occurs without the utilization of any energy. And again, yes, Palak says active transport requires energy. You're right, you can see the ATP molecule being utilized or consumed here when we talk of active transport, whereas you do not see any consumption or utilization of ATP in passive transport. Now again, you can see that in passive transport we have shown, or the figure shows two types of transport. Now can you differentiate between the two, or just tell me what appears to you when you take a look at this two different types of passive transport? Okay, I'll tell you. Now, in passive transport, you can see one process is a diffusion, whereas other is called facilitated diffusion. Diffusion is the most simple type of passive transport. Now, if you see the simple diffusion, here you see that the molecules are diffusing across the lipid bilayer. There is no assistance of proteins in this, right? They are just crossing the lipid bilayers. This means these can be small hydrophobic molecules or very small hydrophilic or non-hydrophobic molecules that can just easily cross the gaps between the lipids. Whereas in case of facilitated diffusion, you will see the molecules do not require energy. Okay, they flow through the gradient, but assistance of protein is required. You'll always see that they require the help of a membrane protein to cross the lipid bilayer. So, did you get this? Is it clear to you? Then there is one more point in this diagram that you all have missed, except is ATP, right? Just leave this part. What is the other difference that you see between passive and active transport? Yes, Palak, you're right. that passive transport always occurs from a region of high concentration of molecules to a low concentration, whereas in active transport, the molecules or ions can be transported against their concentration gradient also. Alright, so let's move ahead and talk about active and passive transport. But before that, we'll talk of the different membrane proteins. So, passive transport requires no energy from the cell, and substances pass by diffusion or osmosis. Diffusion is the movement of substances from high concentration to low concentration, and this occurs due to kinetic theory. That is, the movement of single particle is random, but on a whole, they move from high to low. That is, the concentration on the other side should be high enough that it should create a gradient, kinetic energy, that these molecules they just flow according to their concentration gradient. Now we have one more term, that is osmosis, right? Osmosis is specifically talked in terms of movement of water, and the movement of water from a region of high water potential to low water potential is termed osmosis. So substances will diffuse from where it is more concentrated to where it is less concentrated down its concentration gradient, and no ATP is needed in case of passive transport. So here you can see the diagram of diffusion, right? Now you see the membrane has a specific size also. I've told you that it allows molecules of certain size only to move passively, right? If the size of the molecule is very large, that it cannot, it is not allowed to cross those pores in the lipid bilayer, then it will not move. So this is inside, this is outside, and you'll see that diffusion allows the movement of small molecules to move from a region of their high concentration to the region of their low concentration until the concentration is even or is in equilibrium across the membrane. Now, what determines the rate of diffusion? There are different factors that determines that how fast or how slow the diffusion is going to be. First is the steepness of the concentration gradient. If we talk of the kinetic theory, this is this is very much clear that the bigger the difference between the two sides of the membrane, the quicker will be the rate of diffusion. The more drastic the difference is going to be, the more large the difference between the concentration of molecules will be present on the both sides of the membrane, the more will be the rate of diffusion. Then temperature, of course, temperature increases the kinetic energy of the molecules. It gives molecules or ions kinetic energy. So molecules move faster when it comes to high temperatures than at low temperatures. Then of course the surface area. If the surface area is large, okay, of the membrane across which the molecules are moving, the rate of diffusion will be high as compared to a lower surface area. Okay, so the greater the surface area, the faster the diffusion can take place. This is because the more molecules or ions can cross at a particular moment. Now, the type of molecule or ion which is diffusing, this is also very important. It is seen that large molecules need more energy to get them to move, so that they tend to diffuse more slowly. So larger molecules, of course, they'll face more friction, so they cross the lipid bilayer slowly as compared to non-polar molecules which are small in size. They easily cross the lipid bilayer. So all these factors, that is the steepness of the concentration gradient, the temperature, the surface area of the membrane, and the type of molecule or ion diffusing, determine the rate of diffusion. So did you get this, all of you? Okay, let's move ahead. So here you'll see what are the molecules that can easily diffuse through the membranes. Oxygen, which is non-polar, so diffuses very quickly. Then you can see carbon dioxide, it is polar but very small, so this also diffuses very quickly. And water, which is polar but also very small, so this also diffuses very quickly. So these are common examples that are in comparison to what factors we have talked of that are going to determine the rate of diffusion. Then osmosis, of course, it is water movement. So movement of water from high to low concentration. And you see three types of solutions. We talk of three types of solutions when we talk of osmosis. I hope you know all these terms. That is hypertonic, hypotonic, and isotonic, right? So the direction of osmosis is determined only by a difference in total solute concentration. We have talked of all these factors once we have discussed the rate of passive transport that is going to occur, right? So when we talk of osmosis, solution with higher concentration of solutes is called hypertonic. Solution with lower concentration of solutes is called hypotonic, and solutions with equal solute concentrations are isotonic, right? So we just have to keep in mind that here we are not talking about the movement of any solute across the membrane. We are talking of the movement of water across the membrane, right? So water will always move from a hypotonic, I'm talking of water, to a hypertonic solution unless the concentration is isotonic. So you just have to keep in mind the difference between osmosis and diffusion. Diffusion we talk in terms of solute, whereas osmosis we always talk in terms of movement of water. Okay, so this figure, you can just take a look at this figure and see how from a hypotonic solution the water moves towards the hypertonic solution. Okay, then we have to talk of facilitated diffusion. You have already seen that in that particular figure. So large polar molecules such as glucose and amino acids cannot diffuse across the lipid bilayer on their own. Also, ions such as sodium and chloride are not allowed to cross the membrane. So these molecules, they actually, these ions and molecules, they require the assistance of any protein, any medium that is going to allow the movement of these molecules across the membrane. So these molecules pass through protein channels instead, and diffusion through these channels is called facilitated diffusion because it is aided by the help of some other proteins. So it is called facilitated diffusion. Movement of molecules is still passive. It is not requiring energy. Just like ordinary diffusion, the only difference is the molecules go or move through a protein channel instead of passing between the phospholipids, right? So here in this figure, you can see how facilitated diffusion occurs. You can see the movement of, say, ions across the membrane from inside of the cell to the cell exterior. But you'll see that these molecules are allowed to move through the membrane through the assistance of this particular membrane. So this is called membrane protein. So this is called facilitated diffusion. So you can see here that we have already seen that diagram where you have seen that without the assistance of protein, these small molecules could cross the lipid bilayer. But for these large or say polar molecules, they need the assistance of this particular protein channel. And once this protein channel is present, these molecules will also diffuse through the membrane unless their concentration is same across the membrane, unless this equilibrium is reached. So facilitated diffusion is still diffusion, so requires no energy or ATP. Many polar molecules and ions that are normally stopped by the lipid bilayer of the membrane diffuse passively with the help of transport proteins. Passive movement of molecules down its concentration gradient via a transport protein can be defined as facilitated diffusion. Okay, so I hope all this is clear to you. That is the different types of passive transport. What is diffusion? What is osmosis? And then what is facilitated diffusion? Okay, So, this is all for today. We will be talking about the uh, active transport, right, in the next class, and we'll again talk of the different processes and the different mechanisms and the different type of transporters that help the cell actively transport molecules across its membrane. Thank you so much.